Hello, hello. We continue reading the book Frank Baler Finds T.H. And we have been talking about an exchange between John and Priscilla, the astrologers, the healers that Frank Baler went to see, and Frank Baler himself. And Frank is expressing to them how broken he feels and how he doesn't think there's a way out of the pain. And Priscilla suggests, and John suggests, and Priscilla reaffirms that they could end, that Frank could end his pain by running back to Lyran, the woman that he had been with. And this is a very, very interesting point that we want to emphasize, that Frank wants everybody to understand. His personal life is not important here. What is important is the mechanics, because it does apply to all of us. It's no different from an example of addiction. When a person is addicted to anything, food, alcohol, drugs, another person, sex, pornography, anything, not having that thing, whatever the object of the addiction is, creates anxiety. Not having it creates anxiety. Creates, in the case of alcohol, a person is an extreme alcoholic. If they withdraw from alcohol very quickly, they start shaking, DT, they call them, delirium tremens. We have to give them medication to calm them down, right? So what the person desires the most at that moment is the very thing they're addicted to. And it does work like a medication. So what they're doing here, what John and Priscilla are basically saying here to Frank Baler is they're kind of testing him a little bit. And they're basically saying, without saying it, remember that Frank is a therapist himself. So they're basically saying, look, your case is really simple. Your situation is really simple. You're just addicted to this woman. So if you go get another fix, if you go get another dose of your drug, of your poison, you're going to be okay. The pain is going to go away. And he says, no, it's not that. My pain is not for lack of her. Therefore, her presence, in whatever capacity, cannot cure the pain. And then Frank gets into a conversation that is quite deep. And it has to do with this fundamental existential issue that a lot of us face. And he says, there's this thing called a desire to live. There's this fight in all of us, this desire to continue, this desire to wake up in the morning and live life. And if that thing breaks down, how do you recover from that? Frank told me, it's not in the book, but he told me that he, at the time, when he was going through that, he compared what he was experiencing with the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, right? AIDS. How in that particular syndrome, the very part of the body, the very part of the immune system that fights off the virus, that very part of the immune system is disabled. And that's why the person cannot fight it. And that's why in the early days, without the modern medications, they would die. By the way, it's a miracle of modern medicine how people now survive AIDS. It's just a beautiful thing what's happening. But in the early days, that was certain because they would essentially die of all kinds of illnesses because in essence, there would be no immunity. So anything from a common cold to various forms of cancer, whatever, no, they would simply start afflicting the person and they had no way of fighting them off. The very part of the body that fights off illness was afflicted, therefore they couldn't fight the illness. It's a very interesting thing. So here he's saying it's the same thing. The very part of me that wants to live is no longer active, is no longer online, it's no longer working. So how can I want to live? How can I recover from this? Therefore, at the time, he didn't think he could recover, he could heal from what was afflicting him. And he was sure and certain that the cause of the problem was not lack of Lyran. Therefore, even if he could be with Lyran, that would not solve the problem. Therefore, he never even attempted or called or even considered or contemplated even communicating with her because he knew that there was no possibility there's no possibility of restoring the relationship, and there was also no nothing to be gained, even if it could be restored, because it wasn't she that he was lacking, was something much more fundamental. So then he continues in this dialogue with John and Priscilla, explaining what he means. And he says, and this is critical for the book, what's coming next. He says, I would love to have my family and relationship restored, but only if it did not interfere with my path. It's interesting because he always capitalizes the word path, and that's something the mystics usually do. Certain keywords they capitalize to emphasize that that particular word evokes a concept that has to do with the mystical process. My path and my relationship with God comes first. The marital relation is second. I told Lyran that much quite clearly since day one. She knew that and tested me each day on this. I never wavered. God first, relationship second. I put my life on the line for this principle. Okay, you got it. Good enough for now. We meet soon, John said as he stood up again. When I came back the next day at 4 in the afternoon, the wife started, as John smiled discreetly. We did not tell you about Abraham yesterday quite intentionally, but the first superpower on the path is hidden in the story of Abraham. By the way, she continued, you will awaken all of these superpowers soon, not just the 5 we mentioned. How many are there? I asked. That depends on the student, John added. You discovered and mastered the first superpower on your own, so we know you will awaken at least 7 superpowers, but perhaps as many as the 9 in this lifetime that enlightened grandmasters have available for service. It is all so symbolic, I thought. 1 superpower for each month of gestation. No wonder they call these guys born again or enlightened. Then I came back to room awareness. Yeah, Abraham had 2 boys later in life. I had 2 girls late as well. What's the lesson there? I asked, half knowing the answer. Frank, dear, it is time for you to own yourself. You are more than you attempt to appear. For instance, how about you tell me what the lesson hidden in the Abraham story really is? The wise lady said. It was true. I saw myself as an eternal student and disciple. I did not own my personal power. What I called a miserable life was a consequence of a mindset that was beginning to feel really antiquated. So I took a deep breath, reminded myself that I have the right to be where I'm at in my personal journey, adjusted my position on the chair, cleared my throat, dried my tears, and spoke. Abraham asked God for a son. God provides abundantly and gave him 2, not 1 son, because that is what Abraham wanted the most. I wanted to marry my soulmate more than anything. God provided me with heaven through her, more than I could imagine, including 2 precious babies. When she was not happy, God gave me a true love forever, Lyran. Abraham loved his son so much that he doubted his ability to love God as much. That inner struggle was captured in the biblical story where God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son, what he loved the most. I loved Lyran so much that I feared losing myself in her and forgetting my mission and relationship with the divine. My struggle was manifested in constant strife and the eventual need to make a choice. Abraham raised the knife to sacrifice his son, and I left the home. Abraham loves God more than anything on the earth. So do I. Then I added, I needed to test myself on the last one. Now I know for sure. That is correct, John said. All things on the earth are good, for God creates all things. So let me just make a comment here before we going to what John says. This is a really, really important part of this story. Frank Baler has a crisis, and the first time he asks for help, he's not doing well physically, personally. He can't sleep, he's not doing well at all. Finally asks for help from a friend of his, a friend of 30 years, also a therapist. She makes an appointment for him to go see this couple, John and Priscilla, who do a combination of things, astrology, all kinds of things, psychology, a bunch of things, right? And they start talking about Frank Baler's life, starting with the necessity of not killing himself, because according to their astrological data, Frank Baler's life is in danger. He remembers a dream in which he died at the same age that he was then. All of this is in previous chapters, right? And then they start talking about the actual crisis, and the first thing that they say is, look, you can always run back to Lyran, with the assumption again that the crisis is initiated by lack of her. He says, no, that's not important. And they get into this conversation about Abraham. And this is the first serious mystical conversation here. On the mystical path, the first test that we all have to pass, and maybe test is not the right word. Some people call it the first initiation, the first experience we have to go through. But it isn't an intellectual thing. It isn't the kind of thing I can ask you, what's most important to you? Oh, God is most important. That doesn't work. That comes from the mind. It's always a visceral experience, symbolized in the story of Abraham sacrificing his own son. God tells him, if you love me, go and build an altar and burn your son and kill him for me. If you listen, if you hear that story, if you contemplate that story like it's real, like it actually happened that way, it's absolutely gruesome. This is why some people have a great deal of trouble with the Bible, because they actually believe that stuff happened like that. God talks to people and tells them to go build a thing and kill their son, Here, nowadays, oftentimes when a criminal kills another person, if they allege that they're not mentally healthy, they say the devil made me do it. Well, Abraham almost did it, and Abraham would have said, according to the Bible, that God made him do it. So which is it? In other words, clearly, those stories are symbolic. And what the Bible, what the ancient writers, the Kabbalists were representing there is, we all have loves in this world. We love life, we love the world, we love our spouses, we love our bodies, we love everything, right? We love many things. But do we love those things more than we love God? And that has to be put to the test. And oftentimes it is in the form of a crisis. So in this case, what Abraham wanted the most was a son. He had two, now one. And then God says, okay, you're happy with your son? Good, now give him to me, kill it. So Abraham trusts God symbolically. I do not believe for a moment that this actually happened. And as he's about to sacrifice his son, God says, no, that's enough. I just wanted to test you. Well, Frank Baler told me that he didn't really think he would die because Abraham didn't kill his son. He knew that he was under some sort of extreme test. He didn't know how to recover. He didn't think he would recover. But strangely enough, he didn't think he would die either. He thought that there would be some type of solution to it. So he kept trusting the path. And what he's going through with John and Priscilla is an outline of the path that he's going to go through over the following year. This is fascinating. I'm so glad you're here. You may want to subscribe to the channel so that you're sure to get the next installment of the book. We're going to continue reading this, and I'll do my best to add a few comments, hopefully to clarify some of what Frank Baler meant when he wrote these oftentimes mysterious words. But I believe that if you engage in a dialogue and if you add your own comments here to the videos, I think we're all going to learn more as a result of our dialogue, as a result of our discussion, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you and see you next time.